Hello. So today is going to be kind of like a part two of the video I recorded yesterday where I was talking about the fact that I'm a coward. And basically, since yesterday, I thought of more things that, when I look at my life, I'm like, being a little cowardly. And I think that the first one that, it kind of like really came to mind was with my writing. I did mention something yesterday, but for the most part, I was kind of like this. It was just kind of like a throwaway comment, but like the more I think about it, the more I'm like, yeah, like why am I so scared of? What I'm so afraid of? Like what exactly, can happen if people kind of like find my writing? If I put it out there, what exactly is going to, why am I so scared is going to happen? Why am I being so, why am I acting like this? And it's not just my writing. I think any artistic endeavor that I have, this leads to like the same situation of me kind of like realizing that I don't feel confident enough to, for example, charge for whatever it is that I'm to charge for what I'm putting out there. And it is one of those things that like for example, like my writing, usually it is the price that it takes to kind of like print the work, like that is kind of the situation. But basically I'm kind of like I'm at this point where I'm like, you know what, like I have to put myself out there. I'm not being a coward. I don't know exactly how I'm gonna do that, but I think I can start with my attitude instead of being so skittish and so kind of like dismissive whenever my writing comes to play. Like I can actually lean into it and be like, yeah, like this is something that I wrote, and it makes me, I'm proud of it. It is it's a story that I'm telling, that I'm proud that I'm telling, and I'm happy with the fact that not only have I concluded those projects, but that also they have yeah, like not only with the fact that I concluded it, but I'm happy with what I put out there. I was writing before I kind of like decided to stop, because my cousin's birthday is today, so I'm already ready. But we're gonna leave like 4:30, so I still have like a couple of hours, and I had to finish this assignment for school, but I was struggling. It wasn't really flowing, and then I started to kind of like write, but like that too wasn't really happening, so I decided to just take a moment and kind of like just let me just get these thoughts out of my head, because usually this really helps. But yeah, but I found cowardice. I found like, even like some of my aggressive attitudes, they came from a cowardly place. So for example, sometimes something is said or done that really kind of like affects me, and I think that this like me lashing out is in itself kind of like it is my way to kind of like to because the way for me to kind of like walk out of a confrontation and feeling satisfied about the whole thing is if I say something. If I don't, I feel like I was a coward. But like right now I'm thinking that sometimes like you engaging with things, it's kind of it doesn't really help. It's kind of like bad in a way, and I kind of wanted thinking about the future, like I want to know when when I should say something and when I shouldn't, or not necessarily that there's like a right. Sometimes there are some things that there's like a right or wrong way of you kind of like saying them, but a lot of the times it's more about the consequences. So what's going to happen if I engage? What's going to happen if I don't engage? And that is kind of like where I end up finding myself a little bit in some of these situations. I'm kind of like out here, just I don't want to feel like I have to say the last word for me to feel satisfied, for me to feel good about myself. I really want to look at things and find peace, like even in situations that are not peaceful. I want to kind of like be at peace with myself at the very least. I may not find peace with like the other people who exist in the planet, but you can't control people. You can only control yourself and what you do. So I kind of like I want to invest a little bit more time and effort, and I want to make I want to make better choices. I don't want to kind of like live but the moment was the same. So I don't want to kind of like just live very. I don't want to live like thoughtlessly, carelessly, which is kind of like how I used to. Which, to be fair, I was young, and when you're young, that is kind of like how you interact with the world. But like right now, I think I'm still young, but like I'm grown, so I don't want to kind of like let like those emotions kind of like write me. You know, I want to, you know, like live my best life, and I want to figure out like how exactly does that happen. Because I think that, for example, my fantasies, the ones that really tormented me, even like the simple ones, like they are in a certain way me being dissatisfied with my life, which involves kind of like me not really engaging with things as intense as thoroughly as I possibly can, because you know the Spanish is I'm hiding there, you know, I'm being a coward instead of like facing my life and finding out like how I can have meaning, and you know how I can, you know, figure something out, you know, like and just live my best life. I'm kind of like hiding behind the facade, and I don't want that. I don't want to hide behind the facade like in every sense of the word. So you know, and I think that you know sometimes my aggressive nature, like it is a facade. It is a way for me to feel control, for me to feel like things are working out, that I'm not getting lost. But you know, like there are better ways for you to cope with those things. There are ways for you to actually cope with them, because a lot of the time, you know, like these responses that I have, they come from the fact that I'm not processing things. You know, I'm kind of like existing in this environment where I'm yeah, like where I'm kind of like in denial about something, or I'm kind of like bargaining, which is also an interesting thing, because I think whenever I'm thinking about the stages of grief that I go through, whenever I know something happens or something doesn't happen, I kind of like find that bargaining is, you know, one that I don't pay that much attention to. So like, for example, anger, you know, now like those I see a lot, but like now that I'm thinking about it, bargaining is also there, is also really out there. And a lot of my fantasies is kind of like a bargaining of sorts. I'm kind of like throwing out there what I want, with like hopes that, you know, I'm going to get something back, you know, that you know that is going to change my reality in some way. That is usually not the case, but you know, like still it is something for me to consider. And it's also progress. You know, I don't remember exactly the order of like the stages of denial, the stages of grief, you know, but I do know there's a bunch of them that I can see them more clearly in my life. So right now I'm at this point where basically I want to see bargaining as kind of like progress. You know, it's just not angry anymore. Once again, I don't remember exactly the order. I'm not in denial. I'm bargaining. I think bargaining is the third, right? Acceptance is the fifth. Is like five. Okay, that doesn't matter. But basically, what I'm trying to say is that I'm not being a coward, and like basically everything I'm looking at my life and every single aspect of it, like I'm seeing cowardice, and the cowardice is something that it just really detracts from your well-being. You know, you kind of like you're not going to live as fulfilling a life if you're kind of like hiding behind things. You know, hiding, be it you know like a physical thing. You know, because there's like some type of, you know, physical danger that you are anticipating, or you know, like if it's just you know, something a little more emotional, something that has to do with your feelings, and it has to do with your psyche. And usually like those are, you know, like more prevalent. But you know, like so I think I should focus more on that, because I think that physically, I think it's easier for me to kind of like well, maybe it's not easy to kind of like stop hiding, but it's easier for me to identify like what I'm supposed to do. You know, like I'm hiding, so what I have to do is like leave, you know, this hiding spot, and then I'm out there. But you know, in your mind, like how do you, you know, make sure that you stop hiding behind things? Because sometimes you're not even fully aware of the things you're hiding. You know, you don't even know like what you're hiding from. You don't know exactly where you are at. And I think so. I think the definition might be kind of like the key here, and that is, you know, something that I definitely want to focus more, you know, on regarding like, you know, when it comes to the future. I want you to spot like whenever something doesn't go right, whenever something, you know, goes wrong, but maybe it doesn't go wrong, but like it doesn't really pan out the way that you kind of like wanted it to. I think that there's an opportunity for you to look at yourself and look at what you're doing and find you know, like some type of yeah, it's just kind of like it's the opportunity for you to find, you know, peace in some ways. You know, there's always room for you to feel more peace, for you to be more at ease. And I don't want to accommodate, because I feel like sometimes like you're really used to something being very uncomfortable and painful. So when you fix it a little bit, like you get used to this like very quickly, because you know it's better than what you had before. But you know, you don't always explore as much, so to get to a point where you are like suffering even less. So I want to see, because I feel like sometimes I identify problems. You know, there's some spots where I can do better. You know, situations in which, you know, I know like this didn't go, the way that I wanted it to go. But I try to identify like those moments, but I don't really know what to make of them. Like I kind of like I can tell, like for example my fantasies, I can tell that like they are not good for me, that I'm not really, you're not coming from like a good place, and that I want to kind of like change them some way, but I don't know how. I don't know what exactly I can do, because it feels like everything that I could have done I have already done. So I'm it's kind of like stuck in this limbo. But what I want for myself, like in the future, is to I don't know, I want to kind of like look around, in my head. So it's going to be all very metaphorical. Like I want to like look at this room and I want to explore. So even like some areas that I think that they're kind of like going on, that things are okay, I want to kind of like assess them so I can see that things can be even better. Because as I said, like you get used to something, and you kind of like stop thinking about whether it can be better, things can get even better or not. And I think it comes from like maybe a place of like you feeling like, do you deserve this, or maybe not. I don't think that I have issues with that, but like that is a possibility. You kind of like look at yourself and you find out that maybe maybe you find that the effort is not worth it, because you might accidentally make things worse. And in some ways, like I don't think that is necessarily possible. Like once you kind of get over something, you get over it. But in some ways, I kind of like I see where like people are coming from, because basically like just sometimes like just exploring a certain way that you used to operate, or like a mechanism that you used to employ, just by kind of like looking back at that, you kind of like cooperate to like that thing happening again. So I don't want to, so I think it's important for you to know when to stop, when to keep going, when like yeah, kind of like know your limits, and set boundaries, because that's also something that, because I feel like I don't necessarily struggle a lot with setting boundaries with people. I know a lot of people struggle with that. Thankfully, I think my parents really taught me how to kind of like do that. And although I just like everybody else, like I have some issues here and there, like that is not really something that I find that or like the ways in which I find that like I'm kind of struggling with these boundaries. It doesn't come from a place of like me kind of like feeling like I have to do too much to kind of like be accepted. Usually that's not kind of like the way. I don't know, it comes from me kind of like feeling the urge to prove something. So for example, if I want to prove that I'm strong, there are some things that I will kind of like force myself into doing. There's some situations that like I'm not going to remove myself as like as I probably should, given my history and how like some of these things they have affected me. But it's always there's always something, but the point that I'm trying to make is that I think like with other people, I'm good at setting boundaries, at least at this point in time. I'm 28, so I've had 28 years for me to kind of like perfect this, and also like I think that when it comes to boundaries, there's also the case that sometimes like you set a boundary, but like you can like set something less. So I pushed everybody away for so many years. So right now that I'm coming back, what I find sometimes is that like, oh, I can kind of like this boundary here, I can kind of like further it away a little bit. I can kind of like be closer to this person, and this works out. There's something very endearing about kind of like realizing that like, oh, you can do more. My social life is nowhere I wanted to derive that type of pleasure from, but like at this point in time, I'm kind of like welcoming everything. Like any area of my life that I can improve, that I can be fulfilled, it's worth it. I'm going for it. But what I was talking about, the boundaries, that like I feel sometimes I don't set boundaries with myself, or with like ideas and institutions and like just I don't know, like parasocial relationships, for example. So like all these cases, I end up like letting them kind of like affect me too much, or like I ended up finding myself at a point where basically I am kind of like doing too much, or I'm just like too invested in something that is not good for me. It's not good for my psyche, it's not good for my well-being, and still I'm kind of like stuck. I'm there and I'm kind of doing it, which is why I think it's important for me to kind of like spot this. So for example, an example from this week I've been finding that I've been kind of struggling sometimes for me to get things done. It's been kind of like a back and forth because at some points I'm getting things done, and then at others I'm kind of, stuck. But basically, like in these moments that I'm struggling with productivity, I find that I get scrolling. I'm kind of doom scrolling. I thankfully don't have other apps. The only one that I use ends up being YouTube, but like that in itself is something because the content that is being kind of given is sometimes like even longer. And not gonna lie, there are some things that I end up coming across this week that they were kind of pretty good for me. Like I end up learning something, I end up like enriching my life with like knowledge, so that's good. But there's a lot of like stuff that was just kind of like at its space, like just kind of like wasted. And I've been trying to set boundaries with that, so that whenever I'm kind of like struggling, like I go out and I do something else instead of like being on my phone. If I'm kind of like struggling to concentrate and to get words on paper or whatever it is that I'm doing, I get out and I do something. So it can just be me getting up and doing my bed, getting up and tidying things up, getting up and brushing my teeth, something like that. And I found that is kind of like a better way, because I feel that when I come back after having kind of like actually walked around somewhere instead of like scrolling, it's been really working for me to kind of like get back and have more to say, more to do. So that is kind of like working out. But that is kind of like a boundary that I'm setting, with YouTube, like the app. So it's pretty much what I mean when like there's like ideas and there are institutions, because nobody is forcing me to do anything, but still I feel compelled. Like there is like this, pull that is kind of like sucking me in. But I'm establishing a boundary. I'm not getting there. Nope. I'm going out and I'm doing something else. But it's good because there are so many things, for example, that I have to do around the house that for example, something that I'll probably be focusing on this week. But I should wash my sandals and my platforms and my shoes, and there's a bunch of them that I have to wash. So I've been thinking that maybe if I get to this point where I can't really kind of like get anything done, I can go and wash a pair of shoes, and they're all plastic, so it's not going to I don't have to be concerned with like rules, because for example, if I were to wash my sneakers like that there's like the rules that I have to follow, but that's not that. So there's something else. So basically the point is that the point I'm trying to make is that I want to make a list of like these things that I have to do, that I've been meaning to do for a while that I haven't done. So I'll have it there for me, so when I kind of like get to a moment of distraction, I can go and do one of like those tasks, one of those chores. And so it's going to be productive, because I'm going to be doing something that I'm supposed to do, or something that I want to do, and at the same time, so I'm getting something done. But also I think that sometimes scrolling, it can motivate you, it can inspire you, you can get ideas. So there is like that upside, but sometimes like it doesn't. Sometimes you get kind of so sometimes it is one of those situations where it kind of like it's like you're on a slump, and and you kind of like that situation like that pushes you even deeper into that slump, and that is not kind of like productive. But anyways, back to what I was talking about me being a coward. So as that I already talked about me and my writing, and how I don't want to be a coward anymore. Regarding that, I want to put myself out there, and because as I said, like, what's the worst case scenario? Somebody doesn't like what you wrote, like why? That is not the end of the world. Like, why is that such a big deal? Like that shouldn't matter. Somebody gives you like a 1 star, also it's their prerogative. They can do that. That doesn't impact what I'm doing. Like I'll keep writing to the day I die. So it's not like I'm gonna write less if somebody gives me a bad review. In fact, like, it can be interesting because like I can learn something, can realize like, oh, I can do this better, or I can I should stop doing this. Of course, like that in practice, like that is not going to be like the case, because I won't be. I'm still like it. Let's take this. Like, let's just do it like Jack. Okay, like let's just do it, take it bit by bit. So at first I have to be kind of like more open, and then once I get to the point where I am open and proud, I am going to start focusing on maybe kind of like advertisement. And just kind of like pushing my writing somewhere. Maybe this is going to get somewhere. Maybe it's not. It doesn't really matter, because as I said, I am going to keep on writing. I'm gonna keep working on this, and I'm I don't know, like I haven't really gotten to that point, but I'm proud of myself for at least being open to that possibility. And when I get to that point, I'm going to be, like proud of myself as well, because there's just, I don't know, like, because I'm thinking about what am I so scared of that people, I mean, like, you don't have to hate a person for you to kind of like dislike something, like, and that's not how I work, that's not how people work. So, like, there's also like an aspect there. I'm like, yeah, so what? If you have somebody who doesn't like you, that is also not the end of the world. Like being embarrassed, is that something? I mean, nobody wants to be embarrassed, nobody wants to be cringy, but I think at that point where, because I think when I was 18, I was kind of like terrified of being cringy. I really wanted to be cool and collected and all that. And I don't know, years passed and I got to a point that I realized that, like, what, if I'm cringy, so be it, because I want to be happy. And sometimes, like, happiness involves you being obsessed with something that is kind of niche and maybe a little embarrassing. It can involve like you being very invested, in some fandom, being very active, like creating, fan content, fan arts, fan fictions, fan, whatever. And I said, like, I mostly focused on my happiness. So, if I'm cringy, so be it. I don't care about it so much. But I guess, like, I do care if, like, what I am writing when I'm producing is cringy. I think that there is, like a level here that I didn't consider before, because it's kind of like I can be embarrassing, but maybe not when I write. Because I think that there is that, like, you can be embarrassing and what you create, like, it isn't. But at the same time, like, I feel like the other way around, it doesn't work so much. I feel like if you're cool and collected, let's say, and you kind of like make something cringy, you're still cool. But if you make something, but if you're cringy and you make something cool, I don't know, like, there's definitely a difference there, but it's not, I don't know what I would prefer. Would I prefer to be cringy and have my writing be cool, or be cool and my writing be cringy? I feel like I care less, if I'm the cringy one. But there's more to this. I don't know. That is a discussion. I'll let it kind of like, I'm gonna ruminate on it later, because it might be telling, of something that is happening. And basically, that is nothing. Everything I do is a consequence of, like, all the little machinations in my head. Everything that comes out, even if you think something spontaneous that I didn't think too much, it has to do with your wiring, the way that your brain is, wired and all that. And so, like, even the scenarios I create whenever I'm fantasizing, like, they exist in a way to kind of like validate something about myself, validate something in my head. So they're kind of like very specific, and they're very telling of, where I am at mentally, where I'm going, where I'm getting to, because they evince my mindset, like my values, my principles, my morals. And I don't know, I think I want to be more observant of that, because I feel that there might be some cowardice in some of those, ways, that I kind of like exist. And I don't want that to be the case anymore. I don't want to live my life, like, kind of like worried about some of those things. I'm ready to move on. I'm ready to leave, like, a lot of this behind. So, for example, the cringy thing, like, that is, something that for the most part I've already left in the past. Like, I don't have, I don't care about it so much anymore. But there are other things that I do care. So, an example that I have is, I talked about this a lot lately, but I still don't fully know, like, what it means to be cool, at least according to my standards. And why exactly do I care about it so much? Why can't I just like be a free agent, kind of like just like not caring about how, about what people think, and about how about like the next thing that I want to be. Because like, there is just so much about every fantasy that I've always had that it's very telling, as I said. So for example, I think strength has always been like a core value that I wanted to demonstrate. So when you think about, I think about my fantasies from 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, they all have an element of that, of me showing strength. Naturally, like my definition was, personal to myself. Naturally, like there's one of those things that there is, a common element. So like I think that any person, any human being could look into like what I was thinking, what I was doing, and it could, spot, the pattern. It could spot like, oh, okay, this is happening here, and like this is pretty much what it means. But I think that I had a very distorted version. It was very warped. For example, like it involved me being in unnecessary discomfort and unnecessary pain, because I thought that to be strong I had to kind of like put up with pain and not really be affected. And like to these days I'm like, I find strength in like in living the most comfortable that I possibly can. I don't know, maybe they're not like in the same, the connection is not a direct one, but like there was something. So I kind of like, I would create the scenarios in my head where I would be in a lot of like discomfort, because I could only validate myself if I could only validate myself if I could find, like if I was withstanding pain, because that was also kind of like a way. It was kind of like a shortcut also, because you're thinking about like physical pain. Like that was something that I would kind of like sometimes, like I would put up with. For example, these days, if I'm sick, I'm not trying to put up with it. Okay, I'm finding a solution. I finally, recipe. I'm finding medication. I don't want to suffer for no reason. But when I was younger, I felt like I had to endure. I had to kind of like really put up with it, and that was, something that was not very healthy for me, and it didn't lead to, particularly good choices being made. And it's also not like I was looking for pain or anything, but like when it came, I just found like, okay, I have to withstand this. I have to, basically I'll get sick and I'll be like, I have to heal without anything, like any medication, any treatment, any whatever. And that is just kind of like, why would I do that? Like we have all these conveniences in life. Why would I, do that? So I was being kind of a coward in those moments, because I was kind of, because in my head, as I said, I was creating this kind of like this reality. So instead of like actually pursuing strength, instead of like showing strength in my actions, in my mindset, in the way that I looked at the world and I interacted with it, I was, subsiding it to kind of like physical pain. So that was kind of like, like the case. So I was kind of like hiding behind that facade. So that is, something that I also want to improve moving on. Like I want to, I haven't really had like that specific issue for a while, but there are like, ramifications. There are like other manifestations of that that involve, because it's also interesting, because I think that from a certain point I stopped like valuing like strength in a physical way, and I started thinking more about like strength of like the whole thing of withstanding situations. So I would create this scenarios in my head where I was going through some type of abuse in my head. I'm like, I'm withstanding, and that's a very kind of like bad mindset for you to have. And I'm grateful that like right now, like that isn't the case anymore. I'm not really going about my life and like putting up with unnecessary shit, because you're always going to have to put up with something, like that's just life for you. But you don't have to put up with unnecessary things, that's not what I want. But it is interesting, because I hid behind that. So instead of like actually working on myself and making sure that like I wasn't being kind of like tossed around or whatever, I instead focused on like this version of my this complete fabrication in my head. So instead of like paying attention to the outside world, I was kind of like hiding. And as I said before many times in this video and yesterday, no more hiding. I am fully engaged. I'm fully here. Like I don't want to find myself kind of like going about having to go through something to kind of like justify myself, or for me to validate myself. I want to be able to do that on my own without any external input. Naturally, like having external input can also be valuable, can be important. So I'm not saying that I'm rejecting anything that is being said to me, but I'm not really relying on it to have like get things going for me. As I said, like I want to be like the version of myself that can just that I can just exist independently, which is interesting because independence is also something that I've always valued, to a point that it led to kind of like me having some misconceptions when I was younger. But it's kind of interesting because in some ways, like, I was very much like proud of my independence, but like there were some aspects that I wasn't independent, and in some way that there were some things that I wasn't really independent, that I was actually independent, and my head just rewrote the situation in a way that made it seem like it wasn't the case. So basically, what I'm trying to say is that when I look back, there are so many examples of kind of like me hating myself because of this lack of independence, and at the same time, like, there were so many things that I was so proud of that when I look back, I'm like, that was not very independent of you. But I think right now I'm valuing a more internal independence, because when I was younger, I think there was a lot of, for example, financial independence, like being able to sustain yourself, to support yourself, like that was something. So like that's kind of like how I was measuring like the level of independence that I had. But at the same time, like, I was kind of like ignoring some things, because talked about it before, I grew up in a religious context, so there were so many like different things that were there were so many moving parts, like to my psyche that had to do with, the way that I thought, like there were some situations, some things that I was generally, I don't know, I was very scared that people were manipulating me, but because the way that, religion was set up for me was it was kind of like this cage, because you're basically told that like, this is the right way, this is what you're supposed to think. If you think anything else, you're being manipulated, you're being kind of like swayed by the world or something like that. So I really rejected a lot of the things that I thought and the things that made sense to me for the longest time, because the way that I was brought up. So I felt like I was like, there was this betrayal, and there was not honestly beyond the betrayal, it was the like the idea that I was being manipulated. This is something that I hated, and that like I think about some situations and why like that is something that made me kind of like, it really affected me, like the idea that I was being like the idea that I was being kind of like used, that I was being naive. And I mean, like, my trauma, the one from when I was 13, like that explains a lot of that. But even before it, I feel like that there was something that I was kind of scared of, that I was being manipulated, that I was being used. And so yeah, so basically the point is that like, I valued my independence, but I wasn't thinking independently. I was still very much attached to the notions that I was brought up to. And sometimes, like, you're going to go about your life, and you're going to get to a certain point, and you're going to realize that maybe what you had in the past was like all along what made sense to you. But I don't think it's important for you to go out there and explore. I think that without it, you never really know for sure, like, you never really there's always going to be that question for you. And I went out there, and I explored, and I realized that what I was taught, like, is as I said before, as I suspected, did not make sense to me, and it was kind of like holding me hostage, kind of like in a mental cage, because I wasn't really able to be myself. I wasn't really able to accept who I was, when the person where I wanted to be, and all those, like, small differences. Because sometimes, like, some changes, they're kind of like really big, when you make them, but then like, your routine goes back to what it is, so you kind of like grow used to it. I think that's pretty much how I am at right now. I think, for example, with my dynamic with my parents, like, we have good synergy, and they believe in things, I don't believe in the things that they do believe in, and that is kind of like just where we are all at right now. And but at the same time, like, but it was something that, like, for so long I felt so scared to talk to them about what I really believed in, religion wise, politics wise, and it kind of like got but then eventually, like, I did start talking about things, and it became a whole thing for me. And but then like, went back to our routines, to our schedules, and that is kind of like where we've been at ever since. Because I think I had this conversation. I officially left the church. It was December, 2019, and so like that was the whole conversation that I had with my parents about how I didn't really, because I didn't immediately come out as an atheist. I just came out as a person who was living, the church. And then, like, as months were passing, and then we finally got to a point where, because they would question me about some things, not that, and we got to a point where I was like, yes, I don't believe anything, and that's kind of like that. And as I said, like, we don't talk about it directly, because I think that all the conversations that we kind of like would have already had them. But I do know that my parents still believe that I'll be touched by God someday, and that, you know, like I will join them in their beliefs. I don't think that's happening. You know, like it would make no sense for me to think that's happening, you know, but, you know, like it is their belief, and it is something that comforts them. So, you know, like I'm not going to take that away from them, you know, and because also, like, I don't think that I could take that away from them because they believe that, you know, so I could say that, like, I don't think that's happening, but they still, like, they would believe. And, you know, I feel like sometimes, like, I missed on the, not necessarily, you know, the religious belief, but I think I struggle believing in things and people. So I feel like, you know, like that is something that unwavering faith is something that I've had in the past. You know, I had unwavering faith in the vision of the future that I had, you know, from ages 11 to 21. You know, I really, you know, it was quite something. I believed in something, but, you know, since then, like, I don't think, I mean, I think every once in a while I'm gonna have a very intense fantasy that is going to involve, like, every aspect of my life, and usually it involves kind of like the past having been different, you know, so it's not really, it's not that, you know, it would be it would have been real if there was something. It's just that the absence, you know, like, it is something, I don't know, because I feel like if it's a vision for the future, there is a kind of like a way that it could have happened, you know, very unlikely, but there is a possibility. While something that also involves the past, you know, like the past is set in stone, you know, I mean, naturally we don't always remember it, so that is, you know, something that, you know, can kind of like impact our, you know, our, you know, like our perception of, you know, like the past, but also of the present. And, you know, there are some things that we're never going to remember, and it kind of sucks, you know. It's something that, like, really affects me. And I mean, not all the time, but, like, sometimes I'm like, okay, I wish I remembered exactly what had happened, because that way, I mean, I don't even know exactly expect to accomplish. Thinking about my trauma specifically, like, I wish I knew exactly what, you know, happened here. It wouldn't change the fact that it has happened, you know. It might even get me kind of like more traumatized, right? I don't know, but, like, that is, you know, something that for so long I really wanted to remember, like, every single detail. And, you know, I started doing, you know, the EMDR therapy for you know, trauma, and I started remembering things in a way that I didn't when I first, you know, like, because I started talking about this in 2021. I had, like, I think the year prior, I was having kind of like flashbacks in person more of, you know, like, these things that were happening. And then it was only when I started doing therapy that, you know, I actually made progress in a way that, you know, it started to expand my mind and my vision of what happened. Well, I never got to the bottom of it. There's just, like, so many other questions that I don't have the answer to. And the thing is, like, I know for a fact that, like, knowing that those pieces of information is not going to make anything better or easier. It's not going to, you know, improve anything. And yet I still crave them. I still want to know, you know. But that's not only that. Like, I feel like that is the one that you kind of, like, realize that, like, oh, you can find more purpose in it, you know, like, oh, this is happening and what have you. But, you know, ultimately, like, there are other things that I'm like, why is that this happened? Why don't I remember certain things, particularly when I was a kid? Because I do have some memories, and usually it kind of, like, sucks, because I think a lot of the memories that I have from when I was a kid, they were traumatic. You know, I'm not talking about, you know, starving or violence or anything like that, but you know, like, they molded me into the person that I am today. And but I only remember the bad things. Why can't I remember, like, the positive ones? You know, why can't I remember, you know, like, the joy? Why, you know, don't I only remember, you know, the pain? And I think that maybe there's something wrong with me, not, you know, something that can't be fixed. I'm pretty sure that, you know, like, if I just keep living my life, I will keep on, you know, improving, and then it's going to be less of an issue as, you know, time passes. But, you know, like, why is that, you know, the traumatic things are the ones that you remember and you forget everything else? Because there's so much joy, there was so much, yeah, like, I had a very joyous, you know, very cheerful childhood. Why can't I have, like, those memories? You know, why do I only have the memories from, you know, like, the bad things that happened, you know? And maybe, like, that is one of the reasons why I'm kind of, like, a bit of a coward sometimes, is because, you know, like, I don't want to throw myself out there, because the only things I remember are the bad ones, you know, like, and that's not really how I want to live my life. I want to, you know, I want to throw myself out there. Maybe throw is a strong word, but I want to put myself out there. You know, I want to kind of, like, exist in different scenarios, and, you know, like, there are limits. Going from, like, 0 to 100, it's very yeah, like sometimes like that is how you kind of like you operate. This is something I was thinking about earlier today when I was thinking about some of my characters, because basically, like this character is introduced to a world that she didn't know. It's kind of like hidden world, and she kind of like ends up siding initially with like the people, the way that the people around them were kind of like positioned, and then it ended up being one of those things that she ended up doing things there, but like eventually she kind of like found out like that there's a different perspective to that conflict, and she immediately switched. And I think you could argue that like, okay, that's very quick, but like what I would say is that she's very new to this world, so it's not like she has that much of an attachment. And also she made a connection. The reason why it's attached with these other people is because of the experiences that she had as as a person, with all like the different flags that she carries, metaphorical flags, and all the different demographical aspects of her life. And I say this because I think that this is how I kind of like have operated in a lot of ways throughout my life. I always had like the things that kind of like matter to me, and basically it's all of these things you can find that it doesn't matter, for example, how you align yourself politically, like those things can still work out on both sides of the aisle and all of that. But when I find like the differences, like the different points, at which I have kind of like how I have identified myself at different points in time, I find that some things, they were kind of like a constant. Like I always cared about them, they were always important, and I was always defending them. But as I said, like your surroundings can change. And sometimes all it takes is like one click for you just to realize like, oh, that is like this here doesn't work out. It's not that it is impossible, but it's that other a different position makes more sense, considering the things that matter. And yeah, so I was basically thinking about like how the switch, sometimes it can be very quick, it can be very sudden, but sometimes like it isn't. Like sometimes like it is kind of like you've had it a long way coming, because as I said, some of the stuff that I had to detangle myself from, to detach myself from, like they came from like my upbringing, like me kind of like being told that a certain way is the right way, and then realizing that I did not fit the mold, and that like the way that was being kind of like tested and that was being described was harmful to me. So like I really needed to kind of it makes me think, because I sometimes like you change like externally, and that kind of like leads to a change, to an internal change. Like you can kind of have a change of heart, and like your external appearance is kind of like reflecting that. But sometimes like that isn't the case at all. Sometimes you are kind of stuck. So sometimes like you change, you can change internally, and externally you can change internally, and externally you can change externally, but not internally, and you can not change in any way, internally or not. That's kind of like inertia right there. But I do wonder, for example, sometimes if my parents they think that like me changing like that externally like would translate to like me changing internally, because it's not really happening. Like I am changing, but I'm not changing my views on things. I'm not changing my mindset. And my mindset, yes, like, but like my political beliefs, my religious beliefs, my socio-economical beliefs, like everything, like it's pretty much still the same. The difference is how I'm kind of like handling things, because I'm getting to a point where I kind of like accept the fact that because you will kind of like think that arguing with people, to make them see what makes sense, to make what is the most reasonable approach, would be kind of like an infallible kind of like approach, but it is not. People, and I'm not, I'm including myself when I say people, we have our biases, we have our tendencies, and basically like we're going to value stuff that kind of like supports whatever we believe in. So even if you come up with something, or you present something to a person who thinks differently from you, and you point out how whatever you are saying like makes more sense than whatever they're saying, if it doesn't support what they defend, what doesn't support what they believe in, what benefits them, because sometimes it's not even like what they believe in, it's just belief, and it's just like what benefits them some way, somehow, and they kind of like, they're not gonna budge. So that was kind of like my mistake when I was younger. I really thought that I could kind of like reason with people, but as I said, people don't want to be reasoned with, and this is something that it took me a while to kind of like accept. to be completely honest. Like I was kind of like saying that I accepted this years ago, but like I didn't. It still frustrated me, and it's still, there's a part of me that was kind of like bargaining, was still in denial or bargaining, you know, with like this reality. So I think that right now I'm finally at a point where I'm getting closer to just accepting that that is the case and that there's nothing I can do. Although, to be fair, I don't want to have this defeatist attitude that, you know, I can't get anything done. It's just like, it's more about, you know, the other people. You know, it's not so much about you. It's about like they have their reasons, they have their beliefs, and you just have to kind of, I mean, it's kind of hard for you to accept them, particularly if what they defend is something harmful to you or to other people. But, you know, this is something that I think about sometimes. I feel like a lot of like my you know, the way that I see the world, a lot of like my empathy, my capacity to kind of like empathize with people come from my experiences, you know, like come from like being born the way that, you know, that I was, in the context in which I was. And, you know, like this has to do with like lots of different aspects. But this is something that I'm like, if I had been born like a little different, in a different scenario, you know, different, I don't think I would have cared, you know, not as I kind of like do right now. Because as I am, I already sometimes like, you know, look for things that, you know, benefit me, you know, not necessarily for whatever is the best or, you know, like the most, the rightest, the most right approach. But, you know, yeah, but basically it is one of those things. And I'm already a bit like that, so I'm not really judging people. I mean, I am, but, you know, it's coming from a place of like me judging myself as well. You know, it's kind of like a mutual thing. But, you know, like life is, so it's kind of interesting because I was talking about, you know, myself being a coward. So I was thinking, how exactly was I a coward in those situations where I was, you know, expressing my opinions? I was being borderline aggressive, sometimes actually aggressive. You know, like, it doesn't this speak to the fact that I wasn't a coward? But, you know, what I've learned is that that is not the case. You can be a coward in many different, cowards come in like all different shapes and sizes, and, you know, like all these different forms in which we manifest, like, you know, like it's just kind of like a product of, you know, like our upbringing. You know, the way that we are, there are some, you know, natural elements, but like a lot of it is nurture as well. You know, as I said, I think the way that I was nurtured, you know, because there are good things and bad things about, you know, anyone's upbringing. And I think that, you know, a lot of like, you know, like some natural things that, you know, they're kind of like the tendencies I have, like they were kind of curbed by, you know, like some of the things that I was taught, you know, the thing of caring about people, for example. That's something that I struggled immensely when I was younger. You know, like I did it because, you know, like I was kind of like raised a Christian, you're supposed to do that. But I didn't care for any of those people, and I was just doing kind of like the bare minimum. I was doing my part, but, you know, it did not come from a place of love, which is kind of like what should happen. And it is interesting because right now, like when I am no longer straight in religion, I have finally found it in myself to care for people, you know, to kind of like care about their well-being and, you know, what is good for, you know, like not just for me, but still, as I said, sometimes I'm kind of like selfish still. I've made mistakes, and I will make more mistakes in the future. You know, something that happened recently, that it was technically a crime that I committed. I did not get caught, but it has been weighing on me because you know, like I was like, that's wrong, and then I start questioning myself, why is that wrong? It's interesting because you kind of like end up if I end up falling a little back into like the morality that I was, you know, taught up when I was growing up, or like without, you know, God or whatever, like what exactly, you know, like was that attaching myself to that. And it's not impossible. I do know some people, which it always makes me question. They're talk about how religion is important and necessary, because if without it, like what would people do? Which makes me wonder, like, what would you do if you didn't have religion? Like, would you just go about killing people, you know? But yeah, so I successfully passed the test, you know, in which I find out that, you know, like that my morals, pretty much, regardless of the religion I am inserted in or lack thereof, you know, I get to this point where, you know, it's wrong, you know. So that's pretty good for me, like really proud of myself for that one. But yeah, but I still did the thing. So my point is that I'm gonna, you know, do the thing again. Not that thing. I learned my lesson, but there are other things I'm gonna do. There are other mistakes that I want to make, and I want that every time I make a mistake, it should be an opportunity for me to be more sympathetic. No, maybe empathetic is the right word, towards people, because sometimes, like, sometimes there is like a pattern of patterns of mistakes and bad calls and people kind of like fucking up. But sometimes like it is kind of like an outlier situation. So sometimes for example, traffic is a good example. You see people making bad choices all the time. You make choices that like if something hadn't worked out, like it would have, an accident would have been caused. And basically like what I try to look at that, I try to think, okay, because sometimes like we make mistakes and we are not always making the best call. So I'm just trying to look at it as like, okay, so this person is having kind of like a bad day, or maybe like they made this one bad call, and like I would have probably possibly made a mistake as well, and maybe not this mistake, but some mistake. And it's good that nobody got hurt, there was no damage, so you can just kind of like move on. But like my dad, he gets very affected by these things. He does the like the finger biting thing, the self-harm thing that he does. And I'm like there just like being like, okay, because I mean he's the driver, so I guess like the pressure is a little different than me who's in the passenger seat. But it is something that is kind of like worth considering, that like sometimes like like people, there's no malice in the way that people do things. They just make a mistake, they make a bad call, as I said. And that is kind of like how like that's life for you. Like that is how and so yeah, so I'm trying to look at people and at situations that happen and be a little bit more like, okay, this could be a mistake. Naturally, as I said, sometimes there's a pattern, so like when you get to that point, it's kind of like it's a little harder for you to be super empathetic, but there is like still a possibility. So I don't even know how this video became about me trying to be more empathetic and like genuinely empathetic, not like the false version of it that I displayed back when I was a Christian. So that's kind of like a whole thing. But yeah, but I was talking about cowardice. So what I've been kind of like learning is that even some of like because sometimes I would say something aggressively, and not so much anymore, but like when I was younger, I would say something aggressively, I would do something a little aggressive, I would like there would be something, and I think in my head for the longest time, like it was like, okay, that is not, you're not being a coward, because you're kind of like putting yourself out there. Because I think that we think about cowardice as you're kind of like hiding, and in a lot of ways it's that. And as I mentioned in this video, like there have many examples of me having cowardly behaviors throughout my life that involve me hiding, metaphorically or physically, from a situation. And I mean, hiding isn't inherently a bad thing. It might not be the best way for it to approach something. I remember the party when I turned 15. I did not want the party, but my aunts, my dad's sisters, they kind of wanted to throw me a party, so they did, and they invited people, and I was really embarrassed because they ended up having a very personal. They expressed their feelings very personally, and there's a lot of people that I was not close to, so I felt very uncomfortable the whole time. But the thing is, like before, like the party even happened and the whole thing went down, I hid, like I hid under my bed. Because I had like kind of like a half bed. And there was like this little hole for like a second bed, so I hid here. And I was mortified, so I hid, so maybe you could argue that I was being a coward, but like that was a way that it kind of like it communicated something. Basically, when like my parents and my aunt and my family, like they saw that I wasn't there, they were all concerned. And I think they kind of like got it. They got, but it was already too late. People were already here. But I communicated something by hiding, basically. And honestly, like I would not have done anything different. I mean, right now, if that had happened, I would have done things a little differently. I would have just said that. But that's the thing. Like everybody is already there. It was a surprise party, so like it was already happening. So there's no way for you to get out of that situation other than going through it. I because also like if I told my aunts, like my aunts to kind of to hold back and not say things, like they would be sad because they prepared the whole thing for me, and they would not have been able to express their feelings, like their emotions towards me. And basically, so like it happened. So the point is that I don't regret that particular reaction, because it was kind of like the best reaction that I could have, because like what else am I gonna do, like I just trying to hide. But yeah, but hiding is not great, but it's not necessarily the end of the world, so I look back, because also I don't want to look back at myself and disdain, have any disdain towards myself, because what I hid, when I wish I had been more proactive, or more active, or more assertive, whatever it is that I wanted. And so yeah, so I don't want to look back and regret anything and just resent myself. So I want to kind of like look at myself sympathetically. So maybe that's where the whole empathy thing was coming from, because sometimes like, I'm not the most empathetic towards like people in general, but also like not myself. So I think I have to work on that, because there's also kind of like the key for you to making progress, because you have this eureka moments when you realize like, oh yeah, like this is that thing, like this is pretty much what happened. That's kind of like my mindset at the time. And for that to happen, you have to be kind of like kind to yourself, because if you're holding, you know, yourself hostage, you know, you have like a gun like aimed at yourself, like you're not going to make progress, you know, like you're not going to you know, like you're not going to allow yourself enough freedom to consider that maybe you fucked up, that maybe the way that you kind of like behaved wasn't, you know, was in accordance to what you wanted to project at that point in time. And there's nothing wrong with that basically. There's nothing wrong with you looking back and feeling like, okay, I made a mistake. I think it's important for you to learn from those mistakes, and like being in denial, you know, gets in the way. So, you know, like I've had my cowardly moment, and not all of them were bad. Some of them were end up being funny. You know, for example, this thing of me hiding, it's something that I refer to, you know, every once in a while in my family context, and you know, like it was a fun moment. But yeah, so hiding physically, metaphorically, emotionally, whatever, you know, however ways you can hide. Like it is one way of being a coward, but sometimes, you know, like lashing out is also a way of being a coward. It's the thing that people say, you know, about how it is cowardly for you to like hit a child, for example, or hit a woman. You know, like that, those notions that people have, like you're doing something active, but you know, like that active thing you're doing is cowardly, you know. So basically, I just looking back, you know, I'm like going through everything I've ever done, and I'm like, yeah, like that was cowardly. I was being, you know, very aggressive, and I put myself out there. I, you know, made myself hurt. I'm not saying this sounds, you know, like a positive thing, like making myself hurt, but in this particular case, it is not, because as I said, I wasn't being assertive, I was being aggressive, you know. So like that is not the right way to be. The right way to be is assertive. Naturally, you're going to have, you know, some moments. So there, you know, we are all human, so you know there are limitations. There are things that we're gonna do that are not going to be perfect, and you know, so like there were moments where I was passive. There were moments when I was passive aggressive, and all those are valid. All those are ways that I have behaved in the past. But now I just want assertiveness, you know. So I look back and I spot those situations and I learn from it, and I'll make sure that moving on, I'm making you know, better choices. But yeah, so all that I wanted to say is that sometimes I have been coward. Sometimes no, like I think a lot of the time I've been cowardly, and I'm kind of like trying to change that for me, and that involves me kind of like looking at different situations in the past and realizing like, oh yeah, like that was an example of me being a coward. Once again, like yesterday, I was very much like, yeah, like I'm not gonna say that I'm a coward because I'm kind of like reinforcing the notion. So today, I'm gonna say that as well. I am not a coward, not anymore. You know, I'm making better choices. I'm not going to hide. You know, be it behind a facade, behind, you know, like some mechanism, or be it, you know, behind a lie that I tell myself behind the fantasy. Like I'm done with that. I don't want to you know, like live my life like that. I want to kind of like every day I want to look at, you know, I look at myself earnestly, you know, like I want to look at myself and really just be able to kind of like assess, okay, is this, you know, am I being a coward right now, or am I not being a coward? And if I am, like, is there something I can do? Because some old habits die hard. So there are some cowardly things that I've been kind of like doing for the longest time, and basically I have kind of you know, like you have to be observant, because sometimes like you just get used to, you know, actions and the things that you're doing. So you have to be observant to see kind of like these changes, but also you know, because maybe you're not going to figure out like how to be less of a coward right away, but you can't give up. I think that's, you know, a very important thing, you know, like don't give up, keep doing it. I'm talking to myself right now. You know, like keep doing it. You know, like you try today and it doesn't work out, try tomorrow, and the day after, you know, like you have the rest of your life to figure things out. You know, it's important to take the first step of, you know, acknowledging that that is like an issue. So yeah, I think that that's it for today. You know, like there's my cousin's birthday. There's my, you know, school assignments that I still have to, you know, get through. So I'm gonna be wrapping this right now. So anyways, bye.